Okay.
Ready to begin, Anton.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? I would like to welcome you today to the Ask a Professional series being put on by the BBPA to support our community, particularly as we go through this quarantine time together. I'm your host today, and I'll be discussing negotiating contracts in the new norm. Our guest today will be Tanya Walker, a civil and commercial litigator. Quick bio. So Tanya is certified by the Law Society of Ontario as a specialist in civil litigation. After graduating from Osgoode Hall, Tanya was called to the bar in 2006. She originally worked for two Bay Street firms before opening her own practice and currently has 10 full-time staff. She's a former board member of the BBPA as part of their board of governance, a Harry Jerome winner, and is featured in a documentary called Cool Black North, which will be redistributed in several Black film festivals throughout the USA. In 2016, she was sworn in as the first Black female bencher by the Law Society of Ontario in 220 years and was re-elected in 2019. Tanya was named as one of the leading lawyers to watch out for in the corporate and commercial litigation and appears regularly on national TV stations such as City TV, CBC, and CTV as a legal analyst. Today, so that's just giving you a quick nutshell of Tanya. So we're going to go through, and today we're going to go through presentation styles. But before we get into it, let's go through give you a quick nutshell of what to expect. Next slide, please. So today we're going to have an introduction. So for the first 5 minutes, we're going to do introduction. Then we're going to go through some of the housekeeping rules and some of the objective of our webinar. It's various components. Part 1 will be talk about negotiations. 2, we'll discuss a bit of scenarios. And 3, will be open to question discussions. Along the way, though, if anyone has questions, we will be addressing those as well. And then last, we'll do the summary and wrap up. As you can imagine, as you see at the bottom, anything that's distributed today is intended please seek independent legal advice. Thank you. Next slide, please. So I want everyone to be aware simultaneously something else. One of the Tanya's not-for-profit she works with the community, not-for-profit, and what they're doing, they're recycling technology. So if you have computers, laptops, cell phones, anything that can be utilized, there's going to be some information distributed at the end of this to tell you how you can participate and put some good use to those old technology that you have around. Tanya will get into a little more detail on that.
Thank you, Anton. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited to present. I know everyone is very, very busy and homeschooling, working from home, or looking for new work. And I would just like to thank you all for joining us. We received a number of questions throughout this in advance for this webinar, and I have tried to answer them all to make this customized. So I'm not Renewed Computer Technology, great organization. If you are interested in donating any technology hanging around your home, please contact me. You'll receive an e-newsletter after the completion of this webinar, and it will contain some information. Some more information is we're going to put on a property law webinar on June 24th. If you're interested in participating in that, please sign up. Also, a number of lawyers have signed up for this webinar today. Thank you to my colleagues. If you are a member of the Canadian Bar Association or Ontario Bar Association, I've worked very hard with the organization to get this webinar free of charge for members on Zoom. And so I'll be moderating on doing business in Africa, where we'll have 3 lawyers from Africa, one from the United States, speaking about the changes in Africa. And that will be on June 25th. So you'll receive that link as well. Feedback is very, very important to us. And I know that your time is very crucial. So in that newsletter that you'll receive, I'll ask you to spend just 3-4 minutes filling out the survey, what you would like to see from the BBPA in terms of topics in the future. If you want any more legal webinars. And also, if you are inclined, then we will provide to you a $5 gift card to Starbucks. The card looks exactly like this, so please do not throw it away if you receive one, because you can use that to get a coffee.
Oh, okay. So what we're going to have today is going to be interactive. Oh, my camera's not on.
Just turn it on for you.
There you go. So today's session is going to be interactive. What we're going to do, we're going to have some polls. And as we ask questions, you're going to see, like what you see right there, there's going to be a tab that steps up there and asks and allows you as participants, this is where you get involved and you can actually put your answers in. So when we ask the questions, we're going to see the answers come up just like that small box right there. We'll ask you to fill it out and we'll give you the results in real time. Is that okay? Go to the next question. Next slide, please. Further, what we're also going to do to ensure so you have some more interaction, at the bottom of your screen, for those that do not know, there's a chat functionality. And in that chat functionality, you can ask questions as we continue to go on, or I can read them off, or sometimes we can have, so at least we can have it be incorporated into the presentation itself. So at the bottom of the screen there. Thank you. Next. So let's get right into it. There's a lot of meat to cover today. So what's the objectives? We want to understand the impact of COVID-19 on specifically your negotiation and strategies and phrases to consider, including when you negotiate contracts. Please. All right, so let's start it off with our first poll question. What are you concerned most about when negotiating during the pandemic? It's A, unsure if you can renegotiate existing contracts. B, making concessions to secure new clients. C, damaging my existing relationships by altering the contracts. D, an imbalance to bargaining power. E, how to negotiate contracts online. F, other. Let us know what using the chat. Go ahead and please fill it out. We'll give you about a minute. So what concerns you most about negotiations during the pandemic? When you're finished, please click the submit button at the bottom. Give you another few seconds.
Going once, going twice.
Okay. And here's the results. What we have, it looks like the number one is 33% is imbalance in bargaining power. By all means, Tanya, go ahead.
Thank you. So I will make sure that I spend a little bit more time on that. Second is making concessions to secure new clients as well. So I'll get into part one, which is negotiation strategy, and that is B.A.T.N.A. And so B.A.T.N.A means the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And what you may need to consider is what other alternatives are there while you're negotiating if you decide to walk away. What I think is really important for the purpose of this webinar is to discuss race. This is a Black Business and Professional Association, so I'm going to assume that most of the participants are Black or visible minorities. And so race really comes into play with negotiations. There was a study conducted by Harvard Law School in 2018, and what essentially happened is it was a simulation where people were negotiating a salary. And when the Black candidate was made an offer or a counter offer, the biased participant, the person on the other side, provided $300 less in starting salary. Now, there's no science to this. I'm not saying it's a accurate predictor of future behavior, but what I'm saying here is that race may play into negotiations on the other side of the table when you are negotiating. And the perception may be you may not be entitled to receive what you're asking for due to race, whether it's conscious or subconscious. Another study that came out is on the other side, and this was reported in by Kellogg's Business School. And what happened here was that there was another simulation in 2013 where Black professionals were negotiating job offers, and the statistics showed that the Black professionals did not negotiate as much as their counterparts, white professionals essentially, and they also had less of a professional network. So on the other end of the spectrum is if we perceive a discomfort, or we do not see ourselves as being entitled to receive that contract or the amount of money that we're asking for, we may not even ask for it. So it's important to realize that. So when it comes to negotiations, the first step point is there might be discrimination that you may have to deal with, and that discrimination could be based on someone sitting on the other side of the table, but it also can be in your own mind. And it's very important to realize that and acknowledge that. So how do you overcome this? One example that I have dealt with recently was a client decided not to hire us. She called a white woman, and I had a great conversation with her about her situation, and then I didn't hear from her. And a few months later, she called me again. She was in tears, and she said that I didn't retain you because you are Black. I retained someone else because I thought he would be more effective. I accepted her apology. I said, at least you own it. Let's move on. And so it's important to understand the other person's, where the other person's coming from. Be open, especially when they are apologetic and they recognize that. What I really focus on when I sense this, race is an issue with the other side, is our facts, right? So the success that we have, it's there, it's written down. It's the decisions are the decisions. So I don't really try to spend too much time changing someone's mind about race, because that's really something I can't do, or I don't feel that it's my responsibility to do. What I want to focus on is, if you're calling me and you're considering a few other lawyers, we are very well suited to assist you with your matter. So building relationships is very important. The Black Business Professional Association is wonderful for building relationships and connecting you to other people. When you get a contract, instead of just saying yes, we represent a few Fortune 500s, but one in particular, when they called and said, we're going to hire you, would you like to represent us? I said, sure, but could you please send me the contract, or let me know if I should draft one up and send it to you? I didn't just say yes right away. And then I scrutinized it and said, okay, well, you don't want to pay for certain things like serving documents, but that has to be done in litigation. So would you consider paying for that? Research is very important. So when you negotiate, you have numbers and you know what you're entitled to receive. And look at positive negotiation starters. So one example of that is, with our firm, we negotiated many contracts, even contracts that we already signed. And the way I approached it was, when we signed this contract, we did not anticipate COVID-19 would be how it is. And therefore, we'd like you to consider renegotiating this contract with us. And the last resort, if you believe that there's some kind of bias that you're dealing with, you might want to suggest a temporary contract, a certain amount, and then maybe a bonus based on compensation performance. So those are ways to deal with a bias in negotiations. Now, really what drives negotiations, my opinion, is logic. The logic is, the sign for logic on your left is bigger than emotion, because the logic should override your emotion. So emotion is what I just spoke about in terms of bias and fear. But logic, your facts, your analysis, your education, your research, that should be the forefront. And how we do that in litigation is, when there's a client that is going to participate in a settlement meeting or a mediation, we meet with that client a few days before, perhaps even a week before, and explain, this is what the next step is. We want you to consider the strengths and weaknesses and your range. So then when they participate in that settlement meeting or mediation, they're participating based on really logic as opposed to just emotion.
Perfect. So let's go into some questions here. So sorry about that. So let's go into some questions. So Tanya, Pa B asks, does proficiency in negotiations come from learning or experience?
Well, thank you, Pa, for asking that question. My thoughts are that it's a little bit of both. Every time I participate in some kind of settlement meeting, mediation, uh, anything of that nature, 95% of my cases settle. I've been practicing for 14 years, so I negotiate quite a bit. I always try to reflect and think of how we can improve that negotiation the next time around. So I think it's a part of it is experience, but another part, a huge component is learning. One of my favorite books is Getting to Yes and Harvard Business, and we subscribe to Harvard Business Review. Harvard Business Review has wonderful articles on business, but also on negotiations. And so I think it's a combination of both. If you have the experience and you're willing to learn from that experience, but also read and you're willing to learn that way, it will go a long way.
All right. Well, Sandra A asks another question is, what is the state of contract negotiations during COVID-19? And how have contract negotiations changed?
Well, thank you, Sandra, for that question. My thoughts are during and post. I'm looking into the future already. I really hope this is over soon. So the problem that I see with contract negotiations right now is that people are making decisions in kind of a crisis mode, in a panic mode. So I see, for example, impulsive decisions. We just were recently hired by someone who wasn't satisfied with his lawyer because he negotiated a fee to pay his lawyer. I thought it was too low. The lawyer accepted that fee, but he was not happy that the lawyer wasn't paying enough attention to his matter. And we might be in such a haste to accept that contract and not think about it being long-term, a long-term relationship. Can we live with this long-term? And so decisions are made on impulse. Another example is taking ethical shortcuts, and that goes into, kind of ties into impulsive decisions. So what I mean by that is that if you order a product and it's supposed to be made of certain material, that person or person who produces it may use cheaper material, less quality material, because you're in such a rush to get it out, or you want to keep the profit margin the same. So that's another mistake that I see. Also, most business people don't realize that you can revisit a contract that you've already signed. So I see that as a big error. Some people say, well, Tanya, I don't have this paragraph called force majeure, superior force, which I'll get into later, in my contract, so I'm out of luck. No, you're not. You can go back to that person that you signed the contract with and say, okay, could we renegotiate this? Because look at the circumstances right now. We didn't anticipate this would happen. So I see that if people continue just to not get into crisis mode, think long-term, and think about renegotiating, it will help during this period of time.
Okay. Couple more questions we have here from Jesslyn C. What is the process of negotiations when partnering with another business? And Erica P asks, what are the do's and the don'ts of going after people who owe you money for work done?
Thank you, Jesslyn and Erica, for those questions. They're very, I put them together because the principles are very similar. Negotiating when you're thinking about partnering with another business, and Jesslyn later clarified it's with contractors. And Erica, who explained that you're going after someone that you dealt with in business to get money that is owed for you for work that has been done. And so my thoughts are, with both of those, really focus, looking at this chart, focus on the relationship. When you negotiate, you want to probably negotiate with the thought in mind, that person who owes money to me, I may want to continue to do business with that person, or at least I want to have a decent relationship with them. The two people thinking about going into business with each other, you both want the same thing, which is to go into business with each other. And so you should focus on that. Another thing I think is very important is putting yourself in the other person's shoes when you negotiate. Think about where they're coming from, what they have to lose, what if they walk away, what will they gain if they walk away? What will they use with their time, or what other resources do they have? So those are very important. Going into collection, you also might think about, does this person have any assets? Does it make sense to sue the person? The courts are operating on a limited basis. Should I just take what I can get now and move on with my life and write the rest off? So you think about your other alternatives if you don't resolve that with them. When other tips are, in addition to preparation and the strategy being kind of working together nowadays instead of being a combative, is also, and knowing what you know now about pandemics and COVID-19, and we don't know, knock on wood, hopefully there isn't a second wave, you may want to negotiate a contract where the phrases deal with a situation if there is a second wave. You want a contract that's perhaps permanent, that you really wouldn't have to revisit again, and thinks of the worst case scenario.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question we have by Sama N. What terms should be in a contract to address COVID-19?
Thank you, Sama. There are a few terms that I believe that should be addressed in a contract. I will elaborate a little bit more on the first one. And the first one is called force majeure, which really means superior force. An example of that is, commercial landlord, please do not lock me out of the premises because I did not pay rent. Because there's a phrase in the contract that says that if there's a pandemic and I'm a non-essential business, I am not required to pay rent and I won't be in default at that time. So force majeure paragraphs are important, but you can't just have any boilerplate force majeure paragraph. It has to be very specific to that situation. So an example of this is a case where there was a trucking company and their contract said that if we deliver our products late due to a strike, we will not be responsible for damages. So in that situation, there was a protest. People stood in the road and there was a protest, and that's why the product was delivered late. It ended up going to court before a judge, and the judge said, you can't rely on this paragraph. Protest, which is a third party out in the street, is very different from a strike, which is internal with your employees. So just because you have it in there doesn't mean that it will assist you. You have to make sure it's very, very specific to and addresses that situation. Another paragraph that you may want to consider is a contingency term. And what I mean by that is, a popular item nowadays are face masks. And so that person who's making the face mask may say to whoever they're selling it to, I need pulp to buy my face mask. I need that product. And so as long as the pulp remains at a cost to me of $1, then I will charge you $5 for the face mask. But if it goes up, then I'll charge you a percentage of that price. So those are two paragraphs that are very important. But the paramount paragraph that's important is superior force, because sometimes it takes time for the law to change. COVID happened in March. Now we are seeing legislation being mentioned about commercial tenants. And so you want to have a buffer between that time.
Okay, thank you very much, Tanya. All right, we have a question from Stella N and Joan W. Can you please provide some tips for negotiations online and for negotiations and online negotiations?
Yes, thank you, Stella and Joan. I'll start off with this. I find that online negotiations are very helpful if you use video conferencing software. It doesn't really matter what it is, but as long as you use it, because it's very important to see the person's expression. There are two kinds of online negotiations. One with someone from the same culture as yourself, and the second is with someone who is from a different culture. And I'll give you an example of that. One example is that I just want to make sure my video is working. Okay, so one example of that is when I participate as a panelist for a conference where people are from different areas of the world, I find that I need to explain myself a little bit more. And so with the Ontario Bar Association, Canadian Bar Association, the Doing Business in Africa, I found that because I'm the chair or the host, when I asked the panelists, what would you like in terms of agenda and time to speak about particular topics, the lawyers from the continent of Africa were a little bit quiet. And the American lawyer was very chatty. And so I asked, why aren't you guys talking to me about what you want? And one person answered, and I don't know if the other two agreed, but he said, you're the chair. You just tell us what to do. You don't ask us what we want. You tell us what you want. And I explained that, well, the way that I do things, even if I'm the moderator or the chair, I want to hear from everyone and everyone's perspective. And therefore, I like to hear your point of view. So with online negotiation strategies, it may differ depending on if it's a video conference. And if it is a video conference with someone from a different culture, make sure that you take time to clarify or ask questions. Teleconference, I find, is very difficult. We argued a case on the phone with a judge near the end of March, and I found it to be very, very difficult because all I could hear was her tone, and I was familiar with that judge. So what I did was I asked so many questions because I had no idea what decision she was going to make. And at one point in time, I actually asked for an hour break to think about submissions for questions that she asked. And because I just couldn't see her and I couldn't tell from her tone how she felt. So I find it very challenging on the telephone, and I would encourage you, if you are going to negotiate online, so by email or by phone, you try to see what you can do to be face-to-face with that person.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. We have another question from Yushi G. Can you please provide some negotiation techniques? The scenarios will follow.
Right. So one I would like to mention is you should not lower your price just to get that contract, to get that deal, to get paid. The problem with lowering your price is that may become your permanent price in the future. So if your price is normally $10 and someone says, well, I'll pay you $5, and you say, okay, fine, because you just want the work. Thinking long term, that person may tell somebody else, well, Tanya only charged me $5. So tell her that, so she'll only charge you $5. So you might think it's just a temporary reduction in price, but that might be your permanent reduction in price. So I wouldn't encourage you to lower your price. What I would encourage you to do is focus on the value that you bring. So when someone is deciding to hire you, what makes you different? What's your value add? What distinguishes you from the competitors? What can you do to further distinguish yourself from your competitors so that person sees the value in hiring you? One example of value that comes to mind is Amazon. Amazon, many of us pay a certain price just to have our products delivered quickly. And not only do we get that, but we also get a subscription to Amazon Prime. We get TV shows and movies. And that's a value that we receive just by paying to get products very, very quickly. And so that's something that you may want to consider, is focusing on the value. And also, what if you don't enter into that agreement or contract or that settlement, what else can you live with that? Or do you really need that to survive right now?
All right. Thank you, Tanya. Okay, so another question from Elizabeth J. What common elements are applicable across different areas of law?
So this is a Black Business Professionals Association. So my presentation was really for business people, and I kind of wear two hats being a business owner. But I did see the attendee list, and I saw that there are many lawyers that have signed up, so thank you again. But these principles can be applied across both spectrums. Common elements to consider, my personal checklist is research. If you're thinking about settling, does a person you're about to settle with have assets, like, so that if you win in court, because all the judge does for you when you win in court is say that you've won, it's up to you to collect. So if the person doesn't have any assets, doesn't have title in a home, it'll be very difficult to collect. And so would it make sense for you to accept that offer on the table right now to reduce your losses? Or does that person have unlimited resources? Also, something I consider when I represent employers, sometimes employees are represented by lawyers who have the matter on contingency, meaning that they will accept a certain portion of that settlement. And that comes into play when you're trying to settle. So is the matter on contingency? Is there another external factor that you have to consider when you are trying to negotiate that may not have anything to do with really what's going on right in front of you? Know the law, your probability of success. I always explain to my client their weak points. So then if they hear it from a mediator, they hear it from a judge, they can say, I already know. And also the probability of success. There's never like a slam dunk. There's always discretion, but the case law provides great guidance. And so same thing if you're shopping for a car, you know how much you should pay for a Honda versus a BMW. You have that research, you have those numbers, you have that range in front of you. And apply polite pressure sometimes. So what I mean by that is when I'm representing someone who is suing, if the other side has assets, sometimes in the process of a lawsuit, those assets kind of disappear. Sometimes somebody transfers it to their mother or their sister or their spouse for no money. And so I will let the client know, we monitor that. And if the client instructs me, I will try to get an order from a judge to freeze that asset. And that makes a big difference when you're trying to settle, because if now the other side, their assets are frozen, they want to move on with their life, and they know that they need to settle with you in order for that to happen or proceed to go to trial. So there's always polite pressure you can apply, but you have to be very careful with it given the circumstances we are in right now. Always have a range. When you buy a car or a house, you usually have a range in mind how much you can afford or how much you're willing to pay. You wouldn't ever go in with your bottom line. You kind of go in with your top and work to your bottom, and think about outside the box. So with lawyers, other than money, what can you settle on that a judge doesn't really have the jurisdiction to order? So what I mean by that is when you go to trial, someone wins, someone usually loses. Someone might be ordered to do something or stop doing something, but you can carve out things in a settlement agreement that make that settlement attractive. For example, reference letters or continuing to work on renovations. Those are things that you can consider that a judge wouldn't necessarily order that would make somebody want to settle with you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. All right, and another few questions here by Folu O. Do you have a negotiation checklist for new lawyers? And Yoon C wants to know, what are some tips for negotiating contracts for entry-level positions?
Thank you for those questions, Folu and Yoon. I group them together because it has to do with getting a new job. And so one's entry level and one's a new lawyer. So I just came up with a list of what I think you might want to consider. And so salary is obvious. You may want to negotiate salary, but you may be a little sensitive towards salary at this point in time because of the situation that we are in. So some things you may want to consider is having a payment for legal education classes. One thing I should mention though, Donna Walwyn, who is the chair in corporate governance with the BBPA, she mentioned this a few years ago when we were at a conference with the National Bar Association. I believe we may have been in Atlanta, Georgia. She was a panelist. And so she mentioned at that time, she notices that men usually negotiate salaries and contracts more than women. That's just her experience. And I actually see the same with our firm. So it's something else to be aware of is also gender. And so going back to this is weaknesses in the firm. So assistance with social media accounts. So if you're working for a smaller company or maybe a smaller firm like ours, you may want to look at what does that firm actually need help with outside of just my work. Is there anything that they need help with? And so you may want to offer to assist with keeping up the social media account up to date, you have to get proper supervision of that, but you can take the lead on that. That's something that people who are partners or senior in a firm want to see, that level of initiative. Also, the higher percentage of revenue for bringing in billable work. So you might have a salary and you might receive 10% extra or of that work product, that file that you bring in. And you may want to negotiate that a little bit and say, well, instead of 10%, could you possibly consider giving me 30% or 10% up to a certain number? And then after that, 20%, then 30%. That's something you may want to consider. Also, one thing I think is very important to consider that I don't often see, and perhaps you're not thinking about losing your job when you actually get your job, is termination. So what I mean by that is usually the law says, the Employment Standards Act says you get 1 week per year that of termination pay if you are terminated without cause, like without a reason. That's the basic principle. And so courts have made up their own laws called the common law that says about 1 week a year, one month per year that you've worked there. And so that is not even usually discussed when the person lands their job. And so what you may want to consider is having your termination paragraph in there that says, okay, if you terminate me after between year 0 and year 1, I will receive 2 or 3 weeks of pay in lieu of notice if there's no cause. If you terminate me year 2 to 3, etc. So that's something you might want to just think about the end, even though you haven't really started. So then if it happens, you don't have to worry about retaining someone to assist you with getting more money. And you also have to think about their perspective, how much you're costing them. So what we often do with people that work in our company is in their contract, they will see how much they cost us. So they'll see how much it costs in terms of benefits, law society fees, the insurance fees, how much their office costs them, how much their legal education class costs them. So they know, okay, when I start here, before I even get $1, this is how much the firm is going to pay for me just to be here for a year. And so it's also important to consider what the other side is paying to have you there. So when you're very junior, there's a lot of supervision that you can't necessarily charge, and you give up time that you could spend working on something else. So that's something to take into consideration. And also my suggestion is at this point in time is whenever you sign on that dotted line, you start to work over deliver. So then you have an easier time negotiating next time around. So if your target is a certain amount of money to bring in or a certain amount of billable hours, if you greatly exceed that, when you renegotiate your contract, say 6 months or a year's time, you have that those facts to say, okay, well, this is the salary I like, and this is the reason why I like that salary. I published the book, or I brought in these files, or my target was 500 hours, and I actually billed 1,000. So those are things that you may want to take into consideration.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Tanya.
Oh, I guess before we go on to part 2, you want to see if there's any other questions, or would you like me to continue?
Yeah. Anyone in the panelists there, anyone that's viewing would like to add some questions, by all means, at the chat function at the very bottom, you can sit down and submit your questions and I'll read them for Tanya.
Okay. I can see, do you see it, Anton? I see it here.
I do not. Oh yeah, there's one there. So we have a question from you mentioned that you may be able to revisit and renegotiate a contract. Where does one have bargaining power, for example, in a commercial lease where you are locked in for a specific term?
Thank you for your question. So, and I guess that goes into the imbalance of bargaining power. So now I understand, maybe hopefully you might have voted for that one. My thoughts are, think about where your landlord is coming from. How are you going to find a tenant in this day and age very quickly, right? We are not comfortable being face-to-face with one another, going into spaces. That space might stay empty for a very long time. So wouldn't it make sense for the landlord to consider giving you back the keys and getting into an agreement where you might have pay an increase in rent maybe a year from now if you're like in a 5-year term, or 6 months from now. But that's the way I would sell it to a commercial landlord, that having me in that space and paying less is better than not having anybody in that space at all. And if you want to rent out that space in the future, it might make it more attractive for someone, for you, if someone sees that someone's in that space rather than it's vacant and it looks kind of, you really need somebody in there. So that's where I would go with that one. And you could always get the keys and get back in. And who knows, the legislation hasn't come out with Doug Ford yet as of yesterday. So I don't know if you might even be required to go back to get the keys and go back in there, because the legislation that he mentioned is if your landlord qualifies for that subsidy that has been discussed, where your landlord would forgive 75% of rent, get 50% from the government and 25% from the commercial tenant. If your landlord qualifies for that, then the landlord pretty much has to accept it if that's what you want to do, where before it was optional. So that's great bargaining power if that's legislation comes out, because you might have to be let back in anyway if that's the situation that you have.
Perfect. We have another question for you. This question is from Stella.
Yes.
Given the current political climate with Black Lives Matter, do you think this is a great time for our Black people to negotiate for senior positions or just a promotion? If so, what are some of the words I should consider using to be tactful and yet effective?
Thanks, Stella, for your question. The problem I have is this is my opinion. So the problem is I don't want anyone to give me anything just because of the color of my skin. I want someone to believe I actually deserve what they're going to give to me. So if I work for someone and I want a promotion, I wouldn't lead with those words at all, like the Black Lives Matter. We know what it is. It might be an appropriate time to ask for promotion and to focus more on the benchmarks. Like, I deserve a promotion because I've exceeded my target. I've worked 12 hours a day throughout the pandemic. I've done all these things, and it just happened, and then you both know in the back of your minds, it's just the political climate might make it appropriate for you to be promoted. But I wouldn't feel comfortable leading with that at all. But we all know what we know. And so it might be appropriate to do that. I hope that answers your question. But so some of the words, I would just focus on what you've accomplished and make it clear based on what you've accomplished that you should receive a senior position or a promotion. Knowing in the back of my mind, this is an appropriate time to ask.
Okay.
Thank you.
Folks, continue as you continue to have questions throughout as the panel continues. Please, by all means, feel free to put in the chat again, and I will bring them up for you.
Okay. So we're going on to a scenario. So I'll let you take it from here, Anton.
Perfect. Okay. So, question by Kayla B and Bev S. How do I protect myself from frustration of contract? Now, here's a scenario we're going to read out. There's a manufacturer in Cayman, and he's to deliver 5,000 masks to a distributor in Canada by June 30th, 2020. The Cayman government guarantees told them that they were required that all manufacturers withhold distribution of masks to medical facilities within the country. The masks are to be distributed to several labs and healthcare facilities in Ontario by July 15, 2020. A Canadian manufacturer can produce it, but double the price by July 31st. In this scenario, and this is for the panelists, now this is for everyone to respond. What should they do? What should the distributor do? So please fill out the scenario and hit submit at the end.
So you can ask the politicians to get involved. You can buy masks for somewhere else to double the price, terminate the contract with the hospitals, your insurer, or none of the above. And so knowing what you know, given that I've been speaking about negotiation for the last 40 minutes or so, based on that, what do you think the manufacturer, it says manufacturer or distributor, should do? The person who is responsible for getting the masks in and giving it to the hospital, who won't receive them from Cayman.
Few more seconds. When you're finished, please hit the submit at the bottom. Going once, twice, and we're done. The results are, wow.
It's tied.
Wow. We have a four-way split, 25% for each. Ask the politician to get involved, buy masks from somewhere else, terminate the contract, or unsure. Tanya, that's a hard one. What do you do?
I'm the dissent, E. None of you guys answered this one. So I said none of the above. The contract is frustrated. So to answer the question, what is frustration of contract? Frustration means there's nothing in my contract that addresses what has happened, but through what you believe in or what you don't believe in, we usually call it in law an act of God. I can't fulfill my end of the bargain. So that contract is frustrated. The person in Cayman said, I will give you the mask, but the government says I cannot. So that's frustration, really. And so they're not responsible for giving you the masks in the future, at that point in time, maybe in the future. So based on what I said in terms of negotiations, what I would recommend that you do is pick up the phone and call the hospital or whomever you're supposed to deliver the masks to and say, this is what happened here. I was supposed to get these masks. They're not coming in right now. You have a due date. My options are I can get it from somewhere else, but it'll be double the price. Or I can end the contract and someone can sue someone and end up in litigation. But I want to work this out with you because we didn't anticipate things would go the way that they have gone. What do you think we should do? That's what I mean by trying to think of the relationship, think of it long-term, and work together towards a solution. My opinion is if you went and just purchased a mask for double the price, you wouldn't be happy with that. You probably wouldn't make anything on that contract, or you probably might have a loss. And that's kind of a crisis decision. I mean, if the hospital said, you know what, a deal's a deal, you have to buy those masks somewhere else, we don't care, then that's one thing. But I would at least bring it to the other side and come to a decision together.
Okay.
So a sample phrase to avoid frustration is, I try to make it short because these phrases are very long, frustration or force majeure type of phrases. And so I just said, you know, in the event that a contract is frustrated, the frustrating party will pay 50% of the product purchased from one of these parties, X, Y, or Z, within 30 days of purchase. So then if you have a term like that in your contract and you are forced to buy the mask for double the price, you can go back to the company in Cayman and say, listen, you're responsible for 50% of that price because I purchased the company from the masks from company X, Y, or Z. So that's something that you may want to consider in the future.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Tanya. So we're going to go into, if there's any more questions, by all means, please fill them out at the bottom. By all means, go into the chat section and of which I'll read out the questions. But in the meantime, Tanya, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
If we are in, say we're going through and coming out of the pandemic here, and as an employer, you want to hire a sales rep on commission, but they want salary, what should they do?
Well, I understand both sides because the employer would want commission because that would give the employer more certainty. Tying the employer into salary when we're in an important, uncertain time would be a bit uncomfortable for the employer. And the employee wants to know that the employee can pay their bills at the end of the week or every 2 weeks. So my suggestion would be a mix of the two. So you might want to negotiate part of it as a salary and then part of it's commission based. So then the employee is able to have some level of certainty, but the employer is not tied to a bigger salary than that employer can provide.
Okay, okay. Well, speaking of employers now, so what happens now if an employer says, you know what, it's now changed, we're bringing everyone back, and I want everyone back here within 2 weeks. But as an employee, they're not comfortable going. What's their point of recourse? What should they do?
An employee that's not comfortable going back to work should speak to the employer and explain, I'm just not comfortable going back to work, and explain why. Other than COVID, are there any other reasons? Some reasons could be, I'm not comfortable taking public transportation at this point in time. An elderly parent lives with me that is a little bit more vulnerable, has a weaker immune system. And so I'm terrified of bringing something back and infecting that parent. If there's if there's some kind of reason other than just the concern, it's important to address that to the employer. And then from the employer perspective, I would think that you wouldn't, for us, most of our employees are not here, they're at home. And I'm trying to keep them home as long as possible, because I wouldn't want anybody to come in here and not feel comfortable, because that person's not going to be as productive. That person is likely to be very worried. So I'm better off having that person work from home for as long as that person can. And that's just thinking about it from each other's side's perspective, and probably giving out a little bit more information than you normally would. But the context is so important in order to negotiate a resolution.
Okay, okay. Now, hypothetically, let's peel that a little bit more. What happens if the work that they're doing can't be done remotely? Is there any options, or not really?
If it can't be done remote, it just depends on what it is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we do quite a bit electronically, but I mean, some files are in bankers boxes and it's very difficult to navigate those things electronically. So what we have done here is we have asked people who are working from home, who need particular files, to come in off peak hours. So if they need to be in here, then come in after 5 or 6 o'clock or on the weekend, and do the work here when no one else is here.
Okay, fair enough. Here's another question. What if you have a buyer that doesn't want to exit agreement and they want their deposit returned? Do you have to give the deposit back?
It depends on what the contract says, right? So usually deposits don't have to be returned. You may want to think about it longer than think of the big picture though. Just because a contract said the deposit doesn't have to be returned, suppose it's a person you've had a relationship with for the last 10 years or so, or you want to have a relationship with them for the next 10 years. And that person explains to you, I need the deposit back because I don't have any income right now and I need that to pay my bills. Then it might make sense to return part of the deposit if you can even afford to do so, because that would result in a greater chance of keeping that relationship alive.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. I know recently right now they've changed the laws with regards to construction. So in construction, say someone says my neighbor has a contractor who's working all hours a day, but they're not keeping physical distance. Do they have any options?
Well, the reason why they changed the law for construction is to increase physical distancing. So right now in Toronto, the noise bylaw has been put on hold. Usually when you are working in construction, you only can work during business hours, not on holidays or sometimes even the weekends. But to encourage physical distancing, it's on hold. And so we have seen a problem where, although it's on hold, with that perspective, it's not always played out that way. So people are just sometimes doing more work and having just as many people in there just to finish it up and move on to the next project. And so there have been issues with noise. And so, I mean, you could call the city or and say, this is the purpose of the pause on the bylaw, and it's really loud. I'm not able to function. I'm not able to sleep. But my suggestion is maybe just talk to them and say, I understand, you have a lot of work to do. You have these projects, you have timelines and deadlines, and that's why you're working all the time on these projects. But the problem is that I'm working from home and I need to be able to sleep, and I'm not able to sleep because of the noise during the night. So could we speak about perhaps instead of having 5 people work on that project at night, perhaps 2? Because you need to finish your work, but I need to also function. And we just need to both be able to function in the best way we can given the circumstances. But so I think a discussion before calling anyone would probably help, because if they find out that you call somebody and they're not happy about it, who knows, more noise might be actually be created. So you just want to see what you can do to make it work.
That's fair. So listen, as we wrap up, as we get to wrap up, what is the one thing that you would like to see? If there was one thing, what was the one thing you would like to communicate or see done by our community going forward?
The one thing?
Mm-hmm. If there is one thing. It's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
Yeah.
Because I don't like to generalize and say that.
Well,
I don't know if it's really, sorry, go ahead.
Well, if you see within the COVID, there's a lot of things going forward. What is one thing that people should look out for or to try to consider as they prepare to go back into quote unquote the new normal?
The necessity of it all. So we have been doing things a certain way for such a long time that it's really ingrained in our minds. And so now I think we need to pause and say, are the things that we have been doing for all this time, is it really necessary given the circumstances, right? So we do so much court-wise with paper, and now we're realizing that you don't have to do all this stuff with paper or actually attend to get the decision from the judge. You can argue by telephone or video conference. I think it's just really, really thinking about other people's space and the necessity of things. I think people haven't generally wanted other people to work from home. And because of the situation we are in right now, people are, and many people are still able to be productive. So is it necessary to then have everybody back in the office when there is no vaccination right now? And second, there would have to be the ability to produce it, like mass production. So just thinking about even going in the elevator, because I am in the office, I might have to wait an extra 5 minutes because I'm not comfortable going into the elevator with anyone. And so some people are uncomfortable with me being uncomfortable going into the elevator. So sometimes people will say to me, I feel fine. I'm just like, I'm sure you feel fine, but I have a 15-month-year-old at home, and I don't feel comfortable. And so waiting the 5 minutes for the empty elevator is not a big deal. So I think that's something that we just need to consider is, given the situation that we're in, what can we do going forward that's really necessary versus making changes that are temporary or permanent.
Absolutely great. Tanya, I thank you so much. Now, before we go, and I know you're going to be circulating some information to everyone on board, but if somebody wants to contact you and get some more information, what is the best contact for your law firm?
They can contact me through email. So it's okay. Tanya, Tanya at tcwalkerlawyers.com. That's the best way to contact me through email. So, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions. And we will circulate this in the email afterwards, this presentation.
Thank you so much. Tanya, I want to thank you as we're drawing to a close tonight. I'd like to thank you for your information. You gave a lot of great feedback and thoughts for people to consider, particularly as we're coming out of this. We saw your panels your upcoming panels as well. So all the members that's been part of this will be circulating this information after as well. Please feel free to participate and support her charity that she supports as well with your disposable electronics, as well as the survey. If you fill the survey, don't forget you'll be getting the $5 Starbucks gift certificate. I thank you again, Tanya. You were fabulous. You were great information. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Anton. It was great to meet you virtually.
As you as well.
Okay, thanks. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for, oh, there's a chat. I don't know if there are any questions. Oh, they're just saying thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay. Have a great day, everyone.